Into thin air. It's a phrase you often hear when talking about people who have gone missing, vanished into thin air, but it's usually just a euphemism. The reality is, even in the biggest of mysteries, it's nearly impossible for someone to truly vanish without a trace. There's always one clue that ultimately holds the answers, or at least points detectives in the right direction to look. But on February 9th, 2004, when Maura Murray, a quiet, reserved 21-year-old nursing student from Hanson, Massachusetts, went missing, it seems that this was the exception to the rule, that she actually did just vanish into thin air without leaving behind a clue. One moment she was there, on the side of a winding road that snakes along the edge of the woods in remote, snowy Haverhill, New Hampshire. The next minute, poof, she was gone. It was like she had never been there at all. Now, more than 20 years later, there are still no answers. How is that possible in this day and time? I mean, there are so many ways that people can be found. They leave electronic footprints with credit cards and transactions. We have drones, cadaver dogs. We have all of these ways that people can be found, living or dead. And the only chance her loved ones have of ever finding out what really happened to her lies in figuring out why she was on that icy road that night. What was her mindset in the days leading up to her disappearance? And that's what I'm going to examine. You and I are going to do it together. It's something her family, particularly her father Fred, have tirelessly been struggling to piece together for more than 2 decades. What happened that made Maura get in her car and head away from everything in her life? And where was she going? All by herself. You're listening to Mystery and Murder, analysis by Dr. Phil. Follow along and listen wherever you get your podcast. Click that subscribe button and watch on YouTube. This is Into Thin Air, the mysterious disappearance of Maura Murray. In 2004, Maura Murray was a 21-year-old UMass nursing student. On the outside, she seemed to have it all. Before UMass, Maura was accepted at West Point, one of the nation's most prestigious and demanding military academies. It is an establishment built on structure, excellence, and pressure, and is considered an honor to attend. Maura studied chemical engineering, ran track, and followed the same military path as her older sister Julie, who had attended West Point. For a while, it seemed like the perfect fit. Maura thrived under discipline. She seemed to like structure. But somewhere between the early mornings, the inspections, and the relentless standards, cracks began to show. In her second year, she was caught taking a small makeup item from the campus commissary, a mistake that snowballed into disciplinary action. Rather than face expulsion, she quietly withdrew. She transferred to UMass Amherst, switching from military precision to the chaos of civilian college life. Friends said she didn't talk much about West Point after that. But those who knew her best said leaving the academy changed her. It was the first time Maura's perfectly ordered world had ever really seemed to just come undone. Now, look, the structure of a military academy like West Point, contrasted to college life, is a huge difference. And believe me when I tell you, a place like West Point is not for everyone. And if you run towards that and you choose that, it says a lot about your personality. What does it say? Well, it may say that you need structure, that you thrive on structure, that something inside you is telling you, I may not show it on the outside, but I need this. Maybe you're experiencing chaos on the inside and your inner voice is telling you, you need somebody to tell you when to get up, where to stand, what to do in order to maintain order. And yes, I used order in the same sentence twice for a reason. You need someone to put order in your external world to keep order in your internal world. If you fail, when you go into that world and it doesn't work and you are competitive, that failure can weigh on you really, really heavily. At that point, you can start to question everything about who you are, what matters, and you can experience a huge existential crisis. Now, let me define what I'm talking about when I say existential crisis. Everybody, to some degree, at some point in their journey through this world, asks themselves, what's the point? We're born, we live, we struggle, and we die. What's the point? You may have a spiritual answer to that. You may have someone you're living for to make the world better for them if you have children or whatever. But existential anxiety is when you're asking yourself, hey, why am I doing all of this? What's the meaning? What's the purpose? And that's why some people gravitate towards an organization, an institution that gives you purpose, gives you a higher calling to be part of something bigger than yourself. And if that gets taken away, and it was part of your definition, you can really be spinning, and your moral compass can have a hard time finding true north. Now, Maura had seemingly done a good job at rebuilding her life. This was a setback. It could be minor, it could be major, but she had done a pretty good job of rebuilding her life. She was now working part-time at the dorms while grinding through her grueling nursing program. She remained in a long-distance relationship with her boyfriend, Bill Roush, who she met at West Point. Bill was a few years older, and he had been described as a confident, athletic, and ambitious young man. Their relationship was serious, but strained. They'd been together for roughly 3 years, but long-distance pressures and trust issues had taken their toll. While Maura was in Massachusetts, Bill was stationed at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, serving as a lieutenant in the U.S. Army. Now, let me tell you about Fort Sill. There ain't much in Fort Sill. It's in Lawton, Oklahoma, and, well, ain't much happening in Lawton, Oklahoma. It just ain't happening there, and it ain't headed there. It's just out in the middle of nowhere. It's hot in the summer, cold in the winter, and it can get pretty lonely. They spoke frequently by phone and email, but friends described the relationship as getting rocky, with reports of jealousy and arguments. According to friends, their chats were sometimes sweet, sometimes strained. Bill's friends said Maura sounded distracted. Maura's friends said she seemed anxious. There were rumors of infidelity. Unanswered emails, missed calls, but nothing major, just typical college-age relationship dramas. Maura's nursing program was also intense. Clinical rotations, late-night shifts, a mountain of coursework. She was exhausted and stretched thin. Still, she worked campus security to make extra money. Friends later said she seemed to be holding it together, but just barely. When Maura landed at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, she had a chance to start over, rebuild and redefine herself. But were the cracks still there, or was that just a one-time thing? Coming up, friends said she seemed distracted, even haunted, like she was carrying the weight of something. The question is, what was it? This is not something that is on the horizon. This is an emergency today.
We have the nitazines, very dangerous synthetic opioids that are actually way more powerful than fentanyl, and people are dying. It's destroying the future generation with chemicals made in these illicit labs.
These drugs have gotten into their hands. Cognitively, their brain has just gone offline.
The Dr. Phil Podcast.
We've got to keep beating this drum. Available on your favorite podcast app. Subscribe and follow. In the weeks before she went missing, something in her life had definitely shifted. The problem to this day, no one, not friends, family, her boyfriend, or investigators, know exactly what. Friends said she seemed distracted, even haunted, like she was carrying the weight of something. The question is, what was it? What could it have been? She was keeping it to herself, but something was weighing heavily on her. And on Thursday, February 5th, just 4 days before she disappeared, Maura was working her usual shift at the dorm security desk when the phone rang. Nobody knows what was said, but a coworker saw her face turn pale. Said the blood just drained from her face. Moments later, she broke down sobbing uncontrollably. When asked what was wrong, she whispered, "My sister." But when investigators later asked her sister Julie about it, Julie said she hadn't even called. Certainly hadn't said anything upsetting. To this day, no one knows what that call was or who was on the other end. That night marked the start of Maura making a string of strange choices. 2 days later, on Saturday, February 7th, Maura's father, Fred Murray, drove out to Amherst. He had planned to help her buy a new car. She had been having trouble with her old Saturn. It was high mileage, unreliable, the kind of car that struggles in a New England winter. Maura and her dad spent the day together, visiting dealerships, grabbing dinner at a local restaurant, and afterward, Fred withdrew $4,000 in cash from his savings so she could make a down payment to purchase a new car. He wanted her in something safe because of the winters. By all accounts, they had a good visit. Fred later said Maura seemed fine. Tired, sure, but that was to be expected given her tough schedule. But not upset. After dinner, Maura borrowed her dad's Toyota Corolla to drive to a party at her friend Kate's dorm. She left late. On the way back, around 3 a.m., she crashed the car into a guardrail near campus. And the damage was significant. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was significant. A police report was filed, I guess so they could activate insurance, but no citation was issued. Maura was clearly shaken, and Fred was upset, but he was calm. He told his daughter to call the insurance company in the morning and they'd figure it out. I mean, when you're a dad and your child wrecks the car, you're upset, but that's sheet metal. Your daughter's okay. Any dad would come to that conclusion. Fred spent the night in a motel and planned to see her the next morning, but Maura never showed up. She called him later that day, apologetic, said she would handle the insurance detail Monday. That was the last time her father ever heard her voice. Looking back, many who knew her wondered if that simple and seemingly inconsequential fender bender is what triggered Maura to take off. Her exact destination unknown. Maura was, by all accounts, brilliant and disciplined, despite the fact that she had had an incident at West Point. The fourth of 5 children in a close-knit Irish Catholic family, she was a gifted runner, high school track star, and had been an honor roll student. This girl was smart, fit, competitive, and a perfectionist. But does perfection have a cost? Of course it does. When you hold yourself to a really high standard, it comes with a lot of pressure. And when you have a lot of external pressures in the real world from job and school and finances and expectations of family and profession, that stress can affect your mind, can cause you to be distracted, and can affect your decision making. Sometimes it can cause you to crack under pressure. Maybe a small thing can be, as the old saying goes, the straw that breaks the camel's back. The main thing to realize here is when you have a lot of different stressors, those are the things that put stress on the body. Think about a 2x4 stretched between 2 sawhorses, and you put a 5-pound bag of sand in the middle. 2x4 will bow some. You put another 5-pound bag, it'll bow some more. You put another 5-pound bag, it'll bow, but now you'll hear it crack a little. You put another 5-pound bag, you'll hear it crack some more. Those 5-pound bags are stressors. The cracks you're hearing are the stress. It's the same thing that happens with your mind and your mood and your emotion. If you have stress from job, school, finances, relationships, self-expectations, that's like 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds, 25 pounds. You start hearing the cracks, and you can add even 1 more pound, and pretty soon that 2x4 cracks and breaks completely. And until it does, you start dividing your attention between all of these categories of stress. So even if you have 120 IQ and you're dividing all of your attention among these things, you're no longer functioning at peak capacity. You may have 20 points of IQ invested over here and 20 points over here, and the most you can scramble up might be 80 points. So you're not functioning like you normally do, and that starts causing you to make mistakes. And that creates even more stress. And things start to snowball. Think about it in your own life. You've had it happen when you just start to feel overwhelmed. On February 9th, 2004, Maura, clearly under stress, emailed her professors and her nursing supervisor claiming there had been a death in the family and let them know she'd be gone for a week. There had been no death. But think about when you were in college. How many grandmothers died in your life? Hey, my grandmother died. My grandfather died. I mean, it's like we all had 20 grandparents, right? There's something important I want you to pay attention to here, though. A lot of people have speculated that Maura left and had plans to take her own life. Now, I've dealt with a lot of people who are suicidal, and I'll tell you the number one thing that you look at is, are they making plans for their future? Are they making plans to give things away, to tie up loose ends? You look at how they're positioning themselves. Do they have a short-term mentality? There are some real red flags. Do they see themselves as a burden to others? Do they have the idea that the world and everyone they know would be better off if they were gone? If that's what they think, that's danger sign, big danger sign. If they're making plans for the future, that's a positive sign that gives you some relief. If they're giving away things they value, negative sign. If they're doing high-risk behaviors, which indicates they don't value their life, negative sign. If they're talking about ending their life, negative sign. So there are signs where you can really get an indication if someone is at risk for harming themselves. If Maura was planning on running away to the wilderness to end her life, would she be worried about making sure her professors wouldn't penalize her for absences or missing potential tests? Why would she feel the need to lie to them to give them an excuse for the death of a family member? If you're going to take your own life, you're not worried about that. I tend to agree with her family that despite her clearly going through something at this time, there weren't clear red flags that she was suicidal. She packed toiletries, clothes, textbooks, makeup, birth control, and her favorite stuffed animal. If you're going to take your own life, you don't need makeup. You don't need clothes, textbooks, birth control. That just isn't indicating someone who's planning to end their life. Around 3:30 p.m., she withdrew $280 from an ATM, almost everything she had. Security footage shows her collecting the cash, calm, expressionless. The next stop was a local store where she bought wine and boxed liquor, Merlot, Kahlua, and a box of Franzia wine. Now, that may seem like a lot, and in fact, caused many to speculate that perhaps she had plans to meet someone. But remember, she was going away for a week. Do people who plan to reset purchase things so they don't have to be seen and bothered? Could someone her age turn to alcohol for stress? Could they self-medicate in that way? Is that a red flag? That could be interpreted a lot of different ways, but it's not a clear risk factor for suicide. Receipts later found in her car show the purchases were made about 3:45 in the afternoon, and she had printed MapQuest directions to Burlington, Vermont, a quiet, snowy destination 3 hours north. Her route would have taken her straight through the snow-covered peaks of the White Mountains. Now, she had vacationed there before with her family, hiking, skiing, and she loved it there, loved breathing in the mountain air and just kind of relishing in the quiet. She had always said that it made her feel free. In the days before she vanished, she had even searched for lodging in nearby towns like Bartlett, Stowe, and Woodsville. Her final destination and plan was unknown. Her father later told police Maura loved it up there. When life got hard, that's where she went to clear her head. The White Mountains of New Hampshire are beautiful and unforgiving. Towering peaks, narrow back roads, and miles of dense forests where the cell signal fades and the silence is deafening. But again, the White Mountains were a place she knew well. She wasn't going somewhere that it's like, oh, I didn't know this was wilderness. She had hiked there, spent time at the Loon Mountain Ski Resort. So when she packed up her dorm room and drove out of Amherst that Monday afternoon, it seemed she was chasing solitude. Maybe peace, maybe distance, maybe she had the sense to know, I need to check out for a while. The mountains in her mind were safe. People that are self-aware, people who have insight, recognize when they need a timeout. And it is not uncommon for people to want to return to areas where they have experienced feelings of safety, where they've been happy, go somewhere that they have good memories. Could that have been her motivation for going somewhere that most of us might say, whoa, that's kind of a dangerous trip for a young woman to go all alone? Kind of unforgiving roads into a pretty rugged terrain? Well, not if that's somewhere you've gone in the past and had great memories and are familiar with it, and you're young and athletic and have experience there. By 4:30 p.m., she was on the road, alone, in her crummy car. But where exactly was she going and why seemed to be a mystery to everyone but her. She didn't have reservations, but she did know the area. Between 4:30 and 7 p.m., Maura drove north through the White Mountains. Cell tower pings show her route winding along Interstate 91, crossing the border into rural New Hampshire. And the stretch of Route 112 she was driving on, a lonely road cutting through that wilderness, turned out to be the last known place anyone ever saw her. It's where her trail ends. Now, we're going to analyze in detail all of her movements and out-of-character behaviors that led up to her disappearance. But first, let me take you to the scene of the last known sighting of Maura Murray, right up to the moment she vanished. It's February 9th, 2004, and Maura's been driving for at least 3 hours. Night has fallen, it's dark, and it's cold. A few houses, spaced somewhat far apart, are dotted along the road's edge. At 7:27 p.m., multiple neighbors report hearing a loud crash outside that just broke the silence of the night. Now, if you live in the city, maybe you wouldn't even hear it, but out there, you're going to hear it. One woman rushes to her kitchen window and quickly calls 911. She tells the dispatcher she sees there has been a single car accident. The rear lights are still illuminated. She thinks she sees someone walking around outside the car. Just a few moments later, another neighbor named Butch Atwood arrives on the scene. Now, Butch is a local Haverhill school bus driver, had just finished his evening route and was driving his school bus home along Route 112. He did this every day for the past decade or so. He lived in a cozy yellow house with his wife Barbara just 100 yards from where Maura's Saturn came to rest. And as he drove home from his window, he later said he saw taillights and a car that appeared to have skidded off the road into a snowbank. Butch pulled his bus over, opened the door, and stepped out into the cold. There he found a young woman, slim, dark-haired, standing beside a small black Saturn. Clearly, it was Maura Murray. Butch asked if she was hurt. She said no. He asked if she wanted him to call for help. Again, she said, no, I already called AAA. Now, Butch said he knew that the girl was lying. What he didn't know was why. Butch knew this road like the back of his hand. He knew for a fact that there was almost no cell service on that stretch of road. It was a dead zone. He also knew, based on their location, and at that time of night, AAA would have taken a really long time to arrive. Still, he didn't push her. He later described Maura as shaken, maybe embarrassed, but not frightened. He said she smelled faintly of alcohol, though he wasn't sure if it was from her breath or from the open box of wine he spotted inside the car. Undeterred, he offered again to call for help. Maura firmly declined. Okay, now think about this. Here's Butch on a road with a young female. He's offered help. She's not disoriented. And she said no, not once, but twice. Now, he has a decision to make. Yeah, he can't commandeer her. He can't put her in the bus and take her to his house. She said she's called for help. He doesn't believe her, but she says she has. He's offered help twice. He kind of needs to move on. She firmly declined. So he went home. But he was involved now, and he didn't feel right about leaving the young girl alone to wait for help that he knew deep down was not coming. Butch parked his bus in his driveway about 100 yards away and went inside, and his wife Barbara was home watching television. He told her about the accident and that the young woman didn't want help, but said he wasn't comfortable just leaving her there. Within minutes, he picked up the phone and called the Grafton County Sheriff's Office to report the crash himself. The call was made around 7:35 p.m., and Butch told dispatch there'd been an accident on Route 112 near his house. He relayed that the young woman said she did not need assistance, but he thought they should send someone out anyway. Then Butch hung up the phone, looked out his front window, and waited. From his vantage point, he could still see faint flashes of headlights shining from the crash scene. He claimed he never saw anyone walking away from the scene, and he also never saw any other vehicle stop. There was no shouting, no movement, just the distant outline of that car in the snow. Within about 10 minutes, Butch saw police lights appear over the rise. Sergeant Cecil Smith was arriving. It was 7:46 p.m. Butch was relieved. Help was there, but when he walked outside a few minutes later to check that everything was okay, the officer told him something shocking. No one was there. No one was there. It was just the empty car. The airbags are deployed. A box of cheap wine was spilled on the seat. The driver's door was cracked open, but the driver herself, gone. Now, Butch knew he had not imagined this interaction. Just a few minutes earlier, he had spoken to her. He swore up and down she was there. But now, just 10 minutes later, Maura was gone. And Butch was the only known person who saw her. Now, investigators always say that eyewitnesses are the least reliable. Of the two people who saw her, one couldn't be sure what they saw, if they saw a person or not, and the other didn't see her leave and spoke to her, but could provide little answers to indicate her whereabouts. In an investigation, it really didn't provide much help. In his written statement about their exchange, Butch described Maura as polite but tense and said she didn't seem intoxicated. She was certainly not incoherent. She was upset, but she had just had an accident, so of course she would be upset. She was cold, eager to get moving. He insisted she hadn't appeared suicidal or in particular distress. I'm not sure how you appear suicidal unless you've just really gone over the high side and are behaving terribly recklessly. She had refused help, but she hadn't seemed desperate. That left a haunting question, a question that still haunts many to this day. If Maura had been standing on that road just minutes before officers arrived, where did she go? It was cold enough to kill within an hour, but initially investigators were hopeful. She was there, and just 10 minutes later, she was gone. That's not a lot of time. If you walk 5 miles an hour on a clear, dry road, you maybe walk 3 miles an hour through rough terrain, and certainly if there's snow on the ground. In 10 minutes, you couldn't have gotten more than 500-600 yards. Now, I want you to imagine this area. My producer has been to the scene and walked it herself. This is a remote road. I'm not saying that for dramatic effect. There are 2 lanes bordered on one side by woods. Snow was on the ground. The street is dark. Butch is watching. This is not a high traffic area. No other cars passed. She wasn't picked up by somebody, is my point. This guy's been driving this road for 10 years in a bus. He knows where the road goes. He's looking, it's dark. You see lights coming from way far off. He would have seen the lights. He saw the sheriff's department car when it pulled up. He saw him come over the rise. So, very unlikely she was picked up, which means she would have had to have left on foot. And in 10 minutes and in the cold, you couldn't get very far. Hypothermia is an issue. At that point, investigators' concern was focused on the elements. When she vanished on that cold February night, she was dressed for a drive, not for survival. Witnesses and police reports say she was wearing a dark winter coat, jeans, light-colored sweater or hooded sweatshirt, and brown boots. Practical clothes, comfortable, kind of outfit you'd wear to run errands or take a weekend trip, not to disappear into the wilderness in sub-zero weather. It was later discovered that Maura might have packed a black backpack with a few days' worth of clothes, makeup, and toiletries. Nothing unusual. Those items were missing from her dorm room after she vanished. But when her car was found, there was no sign of that backpack. Her wallet, cell phone, and keys were also gone. Within an hour of the crash, the temperature would drop into the teens. Temperatures that night hovered near freezing. Snow fell steadily. If Maura walked off on her own, she wasn't dressed for long exposure, and you would think there would be tracks left in the snow, at least until they were covered up, but that would have taken a while. She would have lasted maybe an hour or two in that cold. So investigators were left asking the question that still defines this case. Did she really walk into the dark by choice? Or did someone stop and offer her a ride that she never should have taken? A ride that wasn't seen, even though eyes were on the road. When police first processed Maura's Saturn, they treated it as a routine accident scene, not a missing person case. The early assumption that she had simply wandered off would shape everything that came after. Sergeant Cecil Smith photographed the vehicle. There were no signs of forced entry. No blood, no shattered glass outside the car. The driver's seat was pushed up close to the wheel, consistent with her petite frame. The windshield was cracked from the inside, suggesting her head or hand might have struck it on impact. But there was no blood, no tissue, no indication of serious injury. They noted that the car's front end was slightly damaged, consistent with sliding on ice or hitting the snowbank at moderate speed, maybe 25 to 30 miles an hour. My point is, this wasn't the kind of crash that would make someone stagger off into the woods in shock or confusion. And she didn't seem to be in shock or incoherent when she interacted with our neighborhood bus driver. Could a head hitting the windshield disorient her? Of course it could. And we have the phenomena that you've all heard about where you can hit your head and walk and die. That's where you hit your head, you pop up and say, I'm fine, but your brain is swelling. And within the next hour or so, it swells to the point that it puts so much pressure inside the cranium, inside the skull, that it causes you to seize and you can stop breathing and die. That's what people suspect happened to Liam Neeson's wife. But then there was something else bizarre. There was a rag stuffed into Maura's tailpipe. It puzzled investigators at first. Some thought it could have been part of a suicide attempt or a way to disable the car, but her father, Fred Murray, would later tell police that he had instructed her to use that rag to stop the car from smoking. A quick fix for a leaking exhaust. What looked suspicious was, to him, completely mundane. I don't understand how that fixes a leaky exhaust, but it certainly doesn't cause fumes to back up into the car either. It's not a suicide methodology I've ever encountered. As the car sat there under the cruiser's lights, the scene itself began to dissolve into contradiction. If Maura had hit her head, where was the blood? If she had cut herself, there would have been maybe a blood smear on the windshield or a blood droplet on the dashboard or the steering wheel or the seat. If she walked off, where were the footprints? As I said, even though it was steadily snowing, they would have been visible for a while. There were no footprints leading away from the car. No discarded coat or glove found in the snow. Fresh snow had fallen, but they were there within 10 minutes. There were no drag marks, no signs of another vehicle pulling up close enough to pick her up. Around 8 p.m., the Saturn was towed to Lavoie's garage just a few minutes away. There it was impounded and logged as an accident vehicle. The search for Maura didn't formally begin until the next morning, nearly 12 hours after she had vanished. That delay would become one of the case's most controversial decisions. Critics argue that crucial evidence may have been lost: footprints, tire impressions, any trace of which direction she may have gone. By the time state police and search dogs arrived, the area had been plowed and contaminated. The next morning, Route 112 was quiet again, just a frozen road winding through the White Mountains. The black Saturn was gone, towed away hours earlier, leaving behind a churned patch of ice and 100 unanswered questions. For the police, this was still just a car crash. No footprints, no blood, no broken glass. No sign of a struggle. They figured whoever was driving would call the station by morning, report the accident, and pick up the car. But when Fred Murray got the call that his daughter's car had been found, abandoned in rural New Hampshire, everything changed. He drove straight from Massachusetts to Haverhill, and when he arrived, he did not waste words. He told the police point blank, "My daughter didn't run away. Somebody took her." That was the moment the search began in earnest. By noon, February 10th, 2004, a full-scale operation was underway. State troopers, local police, fish and game officers spread out across Route 112. Dozens of volunteers joined them, neighbors, firefighters, even people who had just seen the story on the news. Helicopters with infrared sensors flew low over the tree line, scanning for body heat. Canine units fanned out from the crash site, noses pressed to the snow, handlers calling Maura's name into the wind, searchers on snowmobiles scoured the frozen rivers and trails, sweeping every ditch, every cabin, every thicket of woods. Nothing. No drop phone, no footprints, no glove or shoe. One scent dog traced her trail from the driver's seat of the Saturn east along the road for about 100 yards. And then the scent just stopped, right in the middle of the pavement. That's the moment everything changed. Because the scent doesn't just vanish. These dogs are phenomenal. It stops when something or someone breaks the trail. Investigators began to theorize, did Maura get into another vehicle? Was she picked up by a Good Samaritan or someone with darker intentions? Or did she wander off, injured and disoriented into the woods where no one could find her? By sundown, exhausted searchers were back at command base, empty-handed. The light was fading and the snow was falling yet again, and the temperature had dropped into the teens. Her father, Fred, stood there on Route 112, staring down that empty road where his daughter's car had been the night before. For him, it wasn't a missing person case. It was a kidnapping. He knew it. He told reporters later, "Maura didn't walk away. Someone took my daughter and they know what happened to her." That night, the official record listed her as missing. But in reality, Maura Murray had already become something else entirely. The heart of one of the most haunting mysteries in modern true crime. Despite massive searches involving helicopters, infrared cameras, and hundreds of volunteers, not one shred of evidence was ever found. It was like she had been beamed up. Her banged-up Saturn became both the beginning and the end of the physical evidence in Maura's case. In the weeks after Maura disappeared, Butch cooperated with the police fully. He gave multiple statements, set for interviews, and even walked officers through the timeline step by step. His account never changed. He had seen a young woman, shaken but polite, who insisted she didn't need help. He called the police. By the time they arrived, mere minutes later, she was gone. Those who knew Butch, a quiet, heavy-set man in his 40s, described him as a decent, dependable, and gentle soul. Helpful and reliable, the kind of neighbor who looked out for others. Married, no criminal record, and known around Haverhill, New Hampshire as just the bus driver. A lifelong resident, a husband, a man who spent more than a decade driving kids to and from school. He was known for waving from his bus window, keeping a thermos of coffee by his side, and helping neighbors in the snow. But in a case filled with unanswered questions, even a good Samaritan can attract suspicion. Would police have considered him a suspect? Because Butch Atwood was the last person known to see Maura Murray alive. Police wasted no time checking his story. The same week, officers from Haverhill and the New Hampshire State Police searched his property, the small yellow house just 100 yards from the crash site. They looked through his home, his garage, and even the school bus parked in his driveway. They found nothing out of place. No trace of Maura. No signs she had been inside. No inconsistencies in his account. They ruled him out early. But in the years that followed, when the official investigation grew cold and the internet picked the case apart, Butch Atwood's name kept coming up. People couldn't accept that the last man to see Maura could have been just a bystander. But the truth is, police did their due diligence. They searched, they questioned, and they found nothing to suggest Butch Atwood was anything more than what he appeared to be that night, a concerned neighbor trying to help. 2 years after Maura Murray vanished, Butch was gone too. In 2006, at just 40 years old, Butch died quietly at his home in Haverhill, New Hampshire. When he passed away, so did the chance to ever go back and ask him any more questions. We know that whatever happened to Maura happened in a very small window, but to try to discover what led to the moment of her crash, we have to go back weeks, even years, and really peel back the layers of what she was going through mentally. The difference between investigating a case when all you have to go on is the missing victim's own actions versus when a predator leaves clues, processing a scene is a very different investigation. And at this point, the only way that there's going to be a path to follow, it's going to start by backtracking in Maura Murray's life. I don't think people just disappear out of the blue. There is a first link to every chain. I don't believe that there are accidents. I believe there are accident-enabling factors. And to understand what really happened, you have to go back and see what factors enabled an ultimate outcome. Because events are connected. Whatever happened to Maura Murray is a link in a chain. It is not an isolated event. What we have to do is treat it as a link in a chain and go back and see what is the link that was connected right before she went into that snowbank. And then what is the link that was connected right before that and right before that? And you have to keep going back and back and back and back in that chain until you get to a point where you say, okay, now we have an event that makes sense. This link in the chain is connected to the final link in the chain. This now makes sense. This is all connected. And I promise you, there are connections to whatever ultimately happened. We just have to figure out what it is. She didn't just disappear from a highway. That wasn't an isolated event. She disappeared from her own life. A college student with everything to lose, gone without a trace in a matter of minutes. Once Maura was gone, the questions only multiplied. And we're going to connect them up. The main ones that still today are the biggest questions in this case. Did she want to vanish? Did she cross paths with somebody by chance who had sinister intentions? Did she get scared and wander off to avoid speaking to police? Did she get lost and freeze to death? All of these are links in a chain that will lead to answers in this case. All of that and more on the next episode of Mystery and Murder, analysis by Dr. Phil. Plus, we'll dig into all the theories, blood found in a remote home, a chilling warning, and a voicemail Maura listened to just before she vanished. Are they meaningful links in the chain? You and I are going to figure that out together. Be sure and click the subscribe button and listen wherever you get your podcast, because you're not going to want to miss a minute of this analysis. We'll see you next time.